In the great epic of the Ramayana, right towards the end, a terrible battle broke out between Prince Ram and the 10-headed demon king Ravana. And during this terrible battle, Prince Ram's youngest brother Lakshmana was mortally wounded. And the only thing that could bring Lakshmana back to life, to revive him, was the Sanjeevani herb. But the Sanjeevani herb grew up on top of the mountains of the Himalayas. Who was going to get the herb for Lakshmana? There was only one person at that battlefield who was fast enough to fly, and that was Hanuman, the monkey god. And so Hanuman, he jumped up into the sky and he flew all the way up to the Himalayas. And when he arrived at the top of the mountain, he looked around and he saw all the herbs and leaves and plants. But which one was the Sanjeevani herb?
Hi, I'm Nova Nelson, a permaculture designer here at the Goodman Community Farm at Goodman Arts Centre. I'm absolutely thrilled to have a good friend of mine, someone I truly look up to. She's been inspiring to me and she's a master storyteller here in Asia. Her name is Kamini Ramachandran. Kamini wears many hats. She is director of Moonshadow Stories. She's also the creative producer of StoryFest Singapore, and she's the founding director of Storytelling Centre Limited. I'm pleased to have her here today. Let's talk to Kamini Ramachandran. So Kamini, tell me, did you stumble into the world of storytelling, or was this something that you grew up with?
So my late maternal grandfather, he was a storyteller. And so for many years, from the age of 3 onwards, I stayed with my grandparents. And I inherited his repertoire of stories, the big epics, the folk tales from South India, even the true family stories of when he emigrated as a young boy from Kerala to Malaya. So all these stories have been part of my repertoire now over the last 20 years. And so I don't know whether I stumbled upon it, but I was brought up in a culture of oral tradition.
If you think about this garden, what goes into merging nature and what goes into merging inspiration around you into an actual storytelling production?
So there's a lot of research that goes on before I perform or present a story. Apart from research into oral tradition and anthologies and journals and meeting people and interviewing them, there's also research within yourself. And sometimes in the evenings, I come here into this community garden when the sun is just going down, and I walk among the plants here. And looking at certain plants and certain flowers takes me back in time to my childhood, and it's sort of like a trigger. It helps me recollect in my mind and to remember and recall stories that I was told and stories that I heard growing up. So the garden for me is almost a muse, a place to inspire me, and together with my research, it helps me develop new content.
Kamini, one of the wonderful things about working with you is you will walk through this space, you will look at the plants and the produce that I'm harvesting, and then immediately you have this idea of how it can transform into a cultural experience. Can you tell me about that process and why it's so important as part of your vision as a storyteller?
So cultural experiences, to me, only come alive when there's a huge sensory element to it. So you can take a book and read about culture, but it's a very solitary engagement between the reader and the writer. But with a storyteller is able to create a set with plants, with things that you can eat and touch, and musical instruments, artifacts, objects, ornaments. Everything is highly sensorial. And so the listener or the audience is almost together with the storyteller in this experience of culture, where they're also allowed and permitted to ask questions, to touch, to feel, to eat and taste. And one good example is what we did for Aliwal Arts Night Crawl, In Search of the Galam Tree, where I activated an empty shop house in Kampong Galam with a traditional Malay meal seated on the ground, and you had nasi kerabu, you had the blue pea flower drink, you had everything that I asked for that highlighted the importance of this region within Nusantara. And it also segued beautifully into the musicians and the traditional stories that I was sharing.
just like the work that we do here, gardening, it takes time, nurturing every plant. To create a space like this, you do a lot of work nurturing future and emerging storytellers here in Singapore. Can you share with us about that process and that experience?
So the Storytelling Centre Limited was set up with two different strands. One is to produce StoryFest Singapore annually as a festival. And then, of course, the ongoing work is the Young Storytellers Mentorship Program, where I develop emerging talent. And just like a garden needs to be seeded, emerging talent also needs to be looked after, just like seedlings and saplings. They need to be watered, you need to make sure they have enough sunlight. So that kind of ongoing looking after and nurturing is something that I see as something I'll be doing for a long time.
And on that note and that word, I really appreciate your collaboration here, and I really hope for us to create more and be inspired more by this space. And thank you so much for your time and sharing with us your storytelling journey with us.
Thanks, Nova. Thank you so much.
At the Goodman Community Farm, where we are today, a space where artists, food growers, nature and community converge.
And Hanuman remembered. He remembered when he was a child, all the gifts that he had been bestowed by the gods in heaven. Hanuman closed his eyes and he remembered those powers and blessings, and he grew and grew and grew until he was a giant. And Hanuman lifted up the mountain on the palm of his hand. And Hanuman flew all the way down to the battlefield. And there he presented the Himalayas with all the herbs growing upon it. The wise elder, the healer, he selected the Sanjeevani herb and he revived Lakshmana. And when Lakshmana was revived and alive again, he joined his brother Prince Ram, and together with the monkeys and bears and soldiers, the entire army of Prince Ram battled the demon king and defeated Ravana.